A latch slides in the dark, and the room forgets to breathe. A small candle bends its flame as if to listen, the wick bowing toward the iron-bound chests along the wall. The air smells of lamp oil and grain dust. The light moves like a moth caught slow. Ordinary things begin to matter: a hinge with a rough bite, a tally peg with grease at its head, a key cold as a coin against wood. There is a silence that presses. It does not argue. It weighs. Before we step inside this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And what is the time there right now? Because we want to know how fast our story has to reach you. The storehouse keeps its own weather. Boards swell from years of breath, then shrink to show daylight between seams. A warped door plank remembers every hand that has pulled it shut. Dust moves in shafts like slow rain, rising when the scoop strikes the bin, falling when the scoop returns. Even the candle learns the room's habits, guttering when the latch lifts, straightening when the latch seats again. The hinge complains in a low animal sound. The hasp drags like a blade across cloth and stops. On the shelf is a ledger bound in leather, stiff at the spine. The ink feathered into the paper last season, where damp crept in, blurring ounces into intentions. A mouse has worked the corner and then thought better of it. A tally peg waits in a little groove, as if it were a finger broken off from a hand. There is an order here, but it is the order of men who measure mercy in spoons. The room has learned their counting. Outside, wind lives in the pine tops and forgets the yard. Inside, stillness becomes law. There is an old nail driven near the latch, bent to hold a loop of twine. The loop is empty now. The key hangs elsewhere, at a belt that rattles against a buckle, but the nail remembers its weight. A candle bends again as the latch settles. The room breathes out through its cracks. Ordinary objects keep the count. The door holds the silence like soil holds a footprint, and the light sinks to a single core of fire, steady as a closed mouth. Virginia, in late harvest, is chalk and ash in the sky. The light a cool cloth over fields that have been cut and pulled and left to dry. The big house rides on brick piers and keeps its skirts clean. The quarters sit low where the runoff gathers, their steps sunk into a map of old ruts. The wind comes thin across tobacco stalks, combs dry tassels, and moves away without promise. The ground remembers. Wheel ruts hold frost at dawn, white glass cupped in mud. Bare feet have pressed the same track so many times that the track has learned their shape. The storehouse shoulders its weight near the yard, set where every path must turn to look. Boards are thick, strapped with iron. The door is taller than a man and wider than a bad mood. It takes both hands to ask it to move, and even then it argues. Hinges grind like teeth working at a stone. The smell inside is a heavy marriage of burlap, oil, and grain. A scoop lives near the bins. The scoop knows every hand. It knows when a measure is shaved to teach and when a measure is made fair for show. In the big house, ledgers sleep beside Bibles, both worn at the edges. When the damp comes up, the columns blur and the numbers swell. A thumb leaves oil and a little sugar on the margin. A quill scratches out a correction, then scratches out the correction. Behind the neat names in rows are other names that do not sit on any page. The moral economy of the place is measured in ounces and punishments, a ceremony of control disguised as care. Doors here prefer to be closed. Shutters want to clap for no reason, as if to remind the day that it has limits. The wind runs along a seam in the wall and whistles on a single pitch, like a kettle not yet boiling. In the store yard, a ladder leans against an idea and never moves. Corn hangs in plaited garlands along a beam. and dries to a quiet rattle when the air shifts. A dog sleeps in a patch of sun the size of a plate and opens one eye when a key rings. The overseer walks with a cane for the sound of it. Tap on plank, tap on stone, tap on the backs of words he wants to hear. His tobacco breath is a veil in the small rooms. It marks the air and lingers, heavy and brown. He counts by buckets and by backs. He knows that hunger teaches better than scripture. He knows this as if it were science. At the quarters, dinner steam rises thin, and a woman waits for a name she will not hear again. A man ties his kerchief twice because once is for the eye and twice is for the heart. A child learns to carry a pail with both hands and not spill. When the bell rings, the sound is iron poured into the day. Work changes, but does not end. In late harvest, the light has a slant that makes even full barns look doubtful. The storehouse holds its breath as the master passes. He carries on his ring the key that tells the bins to open. When he laughs, the laugh does not fit his mouth. Behind him, the door swings a little and then changes its mind. A hinge complains. A candle on a shelf ripples into a brief bow and straightens. Counting continues even when no one says a number aloud. The ground keeps score the way a bruise keeps color. They are 5. Not a hand, but the memory of one. Each moves in a particular quiet so practiced it reads as air. One keeps the storeroom list in a head no one suspects can hold it. She knows which bin sits lower by a half inch and how often the scoop meets the lip. Her breath is slow in the chest. Years ago, a child was sold at dusk with the light going to iron at the horizon. She did not run. She stood until the ground tilted. The tilt returned to level. The loss did not. One works in the parlor and learns the tempo of doors. He senses when a latch will stick and when a hinge needs little mercy. A scar runs around his forearm where a rope once taught him about circles. He marks the cane's rhythm and knows where the overseer shifts his weight when he lies. One travels between quarters and yard, a messenger whose feet decide where truth may cross. He keeps keys only to pass them when called, but in his mind, the keys sleep in a specific place at night, and the place has a sound. He speaks with a nod. He never hums. He adjusts the wick before it smokes. One moves in fields with a back like a tree trained by wind. He counts rows by the taste of dust. In winter, his breath draws a chain in the air, links that vanish as quickly as made. When he lies down, he does not sleep at first. He listens to the boards learning his weight, and the next room's talk laying itself thin. One is young enough to be forgiven, and old enough to refuse. He carries bundles, then carries silence, then carries his look past a face that wants it to stop. In his pocket, he keeps a nail with a head round as an eye. He turns it with his thumb when the cane starts beating a pattern. He names the pattern a lie and puts the name away. The 5 speak little. They move less than they must. Their eyes carry what their backs cannot. Stillness here is power. A still man can count 3 things at once: what is said, what is meant, and what the room is doing that neither admits. The page will not keep their injuries, so they do. Each breath writes a small line on a ledger no one can steal. Names are kept like seeds, dry, hard, patient. A door left slightly open becomes an ally. A shadow thrown by a shelf becomes a promise. The storehouse is not wood alone. It is a mind that has been taught to obey. Minds can be taught other habits. At dusk, the 5 stand in different places where they can see the same door from different angles. A candle bends its flame when the latch lifts. The hinges complain and then grow shy. Grain dust hangs in a sun shaft and turns like a slow world. The five say nothing. In their chests, a number climbs to the next number and waits. Distribution is a ceremony. The scoop rings the bin like a bell. Hands are made to wait. Ounces are shaved as if salvation were a weight a man could pocket. The master stands in a light that belongs to others and makes it his. The overseer rests his cane on the floor so its tap can speak for him. Quill scratches on the ledger. Carry little weather. They do not know what a stomach feels, only how a column looks when it is straight. When the room complains, when a hinge protests or a breath becomes a cough, the cane corrects the air. The scoop continues. The scoop has never been late. Punishment rehearses itself until it is calendar. Every seventh day comes with a speech about gratitude. Every month's end carries a trimming that tastes like metal. When a child mutters a wrong word, a scoop is lifted and held just above the lip until the child understands that words and grain exist in the same world. Tobacco breath drapes the scene. It smells like a room that used to be kind. The ledger sits beside the scoop like a priest beside a blade. What is written there acquires a moral voice. A number that should be a 3 becomes a 2, and the 2 becomes a lesson. The quill lifts and leaves a drop. The drop spreads to a bruise on the page. The bruise pretends to be an accident. The bruise teaches everyone to watch. Silence is forced to hold what should be shouted. It learns to become stone. In that stone are small movements, the dip of a candle when a door opens, the lean of a man's shadow when he leans, the way a name is swallowed before it reaches the teeth. The storehouse sees all this with its grain dust eyes and says nothing. Its boards press back like a chest refusing a blow. When night slips in and the scoop sleeps, the room returns to what it is when no one performs. The hinge stops acting hurt and rests. The latch lets its weight be its weight. The door fits its frame with a sigh. The ledger cools, the ink darkens and forgets to glisten. Yet even then, the ritual remains in the wood as if the boards were a choir that learned one hymn and will not learn another. There is a silence that presses. It is not an excuse. It remembers. Excellent. Proceeding with Part 2, Chapters 5 to 8. The cadence, motifs, and historical atmosphere remain consistent with the approved outline. Title: Needles of Silence. 5 slaves starved their master by locking his storehouse. 1844, Virginia. At noon, a shutter clapped, though the air was still. The latch bounced once, then sat. A lantern hissed on its hook and coughed itself to smoke, glass fogging from within as if breath had been trapped and used. Rats fled a bin still full and did not return. A dog pointed its nose to the storehouse door and sang one clean note, then swallowed it as if warned. Rumor walks on 2 legs here. Someone buried a charm at the sill, so they say, a knot of hair and cedar splinter wrapped in a rag. Someone said poison, but their mouth closed around the last letter and chewed it like a gristle. The overseer spat and called the signs foolishness. He tapped the cane to set the yard back to pace. Tap on plank, tap on stone. The sound made order and drew a net around fear. The 5 did not speak. They arranged sacks. They lifted without strain. They watched the lamp choke and filed the time of it away. One picked up a ration slip fallen in damp. The ink had run into a smudge shaped like a thumbprint that did not belong to any god. The slip dried into a blur that meant hunger later for someone who had already met it last week. The ground remembers. By evening, a hinge moaned without being asked to move. The storehouse door exhaled as if it had lungs that were learning restraint. Grain dust turned in a shaft and refused to fall. The 5 tallied omens as if they were weights. Lamp hiss, 1, shutter clap, 2, rat flight, 3, dog's note, 4, ink smudge, 5. Numbers made a scaffold inside the chest where breath could climb and wait. The night did not bring wind. It brought quiet that felt like cloth over a face. Thin enough to breathe through. Thick enough to know it was there. In that quiet, small things grew large. A nail shifting in its hole, a board taking a new set, a wick deciding not to smoke. Justice has a walk that does not sound like boots. It sounds like a hinge that has chosen when to speak. The master's appetite thinned before his voice did. Plates returned with their rims clean and their centers mostly white. A hand reached for bread and thought better of it. A spoon paused and learned the habit of returning to the table empty. He laughed smaller and then less. Laughter takes a body to lift it, and his would not. His keyring struck his belt and sounded heavier than it had last month. Doctors are men of bottles and faith. They came with their cases and their coats that smelled of powders and old leather. Autumn Ag, one said, because the marsh speaks into the air when nights cool. Bleed him, said another, because the body must be reminded who is in charge. The vein opened, and memory went with it. The skin paled to echo the ledger page. The cloth at his lips showed a faint stain, not bright, not frightening, but ordinary, and therefore more dangerous. Remedies thinned him further. He sat in rooms that were not hungry and felt hunted by the absence of taste. He walked the yard and heard the cane report, but the sound did not settle his stomach. He slept and woke as if a rope had been drawn through his middle and tugged. The doctor spoke of vapors and balance. Calomel, opium, something to raise a sweat. A bath to lower a fire that no thermometer could name. The candles guttered low at the edge of the room, their small flames nodding like men who agree and do not mean it. His wife asked if perhaps the meat had turned. The cook said the meat was fine and looked at her hands. The overseer said the season was to blame and looked at his cane. The 5 said nothing and measured the time between coughs. It was not hope. It was counting. Stillness made a ledger out of air. The keyring tapped his belt as he paced. In the parlor, the windows learned to fog where he passed, a body's damp recorded on cold glass. He called for the scoop to be fairer at distribution, then forgot he had said it, then remembered and doubled the sting, as if order could be made by reversing kindness. He ate less. He wanted more. The 2 forces watched each other and refused to shake hands. A body can falter without admitting its reasons. Symptoms do not confess. They rehearse. He sat at the head of the table and held his napkin like a flag, half raised to surrender, then folded it into a square like a field, then into a strip like a binding. Outside, a hinge cried once and then kept its counsel. Inside, breath began to come with pauses between that could be counted and were. Silence observes what paper denies. The night without the moon arrived without ceremony. Frogs rang a bell across the low ground and made an hour out of it. The 5 moved like men crossing a room in which a baby sleeps. Heels soft, toes trustworthy, breath stored where it would not be seen. Tokens are what hands make when hands cannot write. One carried a spare latch pin, taken long ago from a door that forgot it was missing a tooth. It lay in the palm with the weight of a small promise. One had a coil of wire rolled tight enough to be a thought and strong enough to be a sentence. One kept a nail with a head like an eye. One held a scrap of cedar for its clean, grave scent. One tied a knot of twine and did not cut the ends even. The tokens sat against skin like prayer that does not ask, only steadies. They divided steps by breath and measured the yard by the frog's bell. 20 steps to the corner. 10 to the shadow without a dog. 3 to the place where the plank's seam gives a kindness if you praise it with a blade. The storehouse is a mind that can be taught. They studied it and did not hurry. It is unkind to hurry a hinge. It remembers. A door knows when it is being watched. The latch took their regard and turned it into patience. They felt the iron with the backs of their knuckles, the way a man feels a kettle to guess if it will burn. The nail found an old hole and proved its past. The wire listened for the hasp's voice and answered in a lower key. The cedar sat at the threshold to keep witness about the hours. They set themselves by corners and counted. One waited for the candle in the big house to lower to a certain thumb width above the holder. One waited for the cough to find its third minute. One watched the clouds turn a shade that means the east has learned to want the day. One listened for the cane and blessed its absence. One kept the numbers in his mouth and did not speak them. No speech here, only the soft complaint of iron when it is asked to be righteous. The frogs kept the bell. The night kept the door. The tokens learned their purpose not as weapons, but as manners. A hinge is a person, if you know its mood. The plank lay quiet and made room in its seam. The latch dreamed of being heavier and was helped in that direction. There was a moment when everything in the yard seemed to lean in at once. The line of the fence, the tilt of the bucket, the very windless air, and then lean away, having understood. The 5 moved their hands only enough to confirm what the night had decided. Counting reached a number that did not need another. The act is angles and listening. A hasp is drawn as if it were a breath taken in a sick room. Slowly, because sound has a way of multiplying when the dark is keeping score. The pin is reversed, its bright rubbed to dull with cloth, and seated where a hand in daylight will not think to look. A wedge is asked to learn the floor and does, settling with the least knock, like a man who has promised he will not snore. Iron is encouraged to keep its counsel. A hinge tells a story about endurance and believes it. A latch is made to feel its age and accepts the news. No spectacle, only control. There is a ceremony in it. The way a finger rests on wood to feel the other side of wood. The way a breath is timed so that the little noise belongs to the frog's bell and not to the hand that made it. Names are counted in the quiet. Not aloud. Never aloud. Each pull toward shut, each settling of weight, belongs to a name that lives in the body. A child taken at dusk. A wrist taught about circles. A month of shaved rations turned into 2. A laugh at a prayer that was not a joke. The ground remembers. The boards agree. Grain rustles because grain is a congregation and it does not know how not to murmur. The bins answer one another in whispers that are older than any book here. The wedge learns a hymn and hums it only once. The pin wears its new place like a secret marriage. The door learns what refuse means and keeps the lesson. Outside, not much changes. The sky does not bright. Dogs do not prophesy. The house breathes as before. Inside, the master sleeps and does not know that a piece of iron has decided to serve a different god for a while. The key ring beside the bed feels heavier as it dreams. The lamp by the chair remembers being asked to lower and shakes its head. Its wick shortens to a black thread. The act ends when silence says it does. The 5 step back through air that has been stirred less than a spoonful. They leave nothing behind that a cartwheel would not. The cedar keeps its witness. The nail watches the seam close its eye. The storehouse holds. It has learned to refuse. Morning found the door as it had decided to be, present, patient, heavier than talk. Kicks taught it nothing. Pleas offered it nothing to hold. The storehouse held like a mouth that has learned to keep a secret. Inside the big house, candles shortened by habits became stubs, little gravestones of light set along a table where taste had left before the plates. Muffled thuds came from the yard when a temper tried to bargain with wood. The sound traveled a few feet, then fell, as if the day were lined with wool. The master named his ailment, everything except what it was. Bad air, sour stomach, an insult from weather. His spoon grew shy again. The doctor returned with bottles that argued with each other and left them to do so on the sideboard. The key ring lay idle on its hook, a circle of authority that had forgotten how to draw a line. The overseer measured rage in the length of his tap. 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 The cane's voice lost its power to conduct. The five kept to ordinary tasks with an attention that felt like prayer, if prayer could be made of sweeping and carrying. A floor learns a man if a man lets it. They moved through rooms, leaving only the shape of competence behind them, while their inward ledger took another line each dusk. Names repeated in breath, not to inflame, but to confirm. Counting was not passion. It was balance returned to its chair. The storehouse absorbed its punishments like a stone in a pocket. Iron does not bruise where eyes can see. A hinge that has been taught to wait can teach patience to a whole yard. Grain rustled within as if whispering terms to itself. In the hallway, a candle guttered and straightened and guttered again, repeating a lesson about endurance. There is a silence that presses. It does not negotiate. Nights cooled. The dog that sang before slept with his nose to his tail. The moon gave nothing. Clouds kept the ledger of light and spent it elsewhere. Each morning, the key ring asked for a hand and received none. Each evening, the five folded their kerchiefs by touch and put them where a hand would find them without looking. Justice was measured in intervals, not noise. The ground remembers the exact weight of a footfall and will tell it back when asked. Neighbors speak for one another when the truth feels like a draft. Accident, someone said, as if hunger could trip on a rug. Illness, said another, because a word with a Latin jacket lends warmth to a cold circumstance. Curse, when the Bible has grown hoarse and a man wants a new chorus. The court wrote little. Wasting in the season, 1844. The clerk paused with his pen above the line where rations once doubled, then set the nib down and made a blot that spread like a small night. Safer to erase than to know. Rain tapped the courthouse roof and stitched the day together so slowly that nobody noticed time had passed. A bell in the town tower practiced sorrow with a muffled clapper. Corn husks lay in rows to dry, like pages set out after a flood. The ledger closed itself because hands had grown tired of lifting it. Even paper prefers to sleep when it has been asked to betray too often. At the big house, windows were shut against stories. In the yard, the door that had learned to refuse kept its new manner without crowing. The overseer found his cane making smaller maps on the floor. The key ring remembered a hip and missed it. Words were few and wore their coats wrong side out. If truth walked the road that day, it kept to the ditch and did not lift its head. Decades pass the way dust does, settling everywhere when no one watches. A boy playing where he should not slides his hand along a sill and finds a wedge sleeping in a shallow bed. He pries it free and learns the weight of old decisions. In the crack of a floorboard, a bent pin has tucked itself as if to hide from time. He teases it loose and holds it up to the window light. The iron winks. Grain dust motes dance approval. A rhyme survives in porches and low rooms, sung where adults will not hear. Count the names, keep the door. The words have lost their corners and become smooth like a pocket stone. An archivist crosses a note in a margin, irregularity in stores, and then crosses the crossing. The page shows a scar where the truth healed badly. The ground outside the storehouse keeps the footpath where 5 men wore it thin. New grass grows there and lies down as if remembering how. What a door learns it does not unlearn. Hinges that were taught to speak only when invited keep their manners even when the house is empty. Rats return to bins and leave again for reasons of their own. Children press ears to wood to listen for a story and swear they hear grain telling secrets. The past has a voice, but it prefers a whisper. The ground remembers. Storm days teach buildings to breathe. The storehouse takes a lungful of wind and lets it out through its seams. The hinge answers the gust like a throat in a hymn, low and certain. Sometimes, when no one is there to see it, the latch lifts and settles without a hand, a small rehearsal for a play whose audience left years ago. The scoop on its hook hangs like an empty question. The 5 do not appear in ink. Paper keeps what it is paid to keep. Yet the earth remembers their pacing, the way 5 sets of steps laid a pattern no rain has washed away. In high summer, the line is dry dust. In spring, it is a dark vein. In winter, frost lays in it like a white sentence no mouth can form. Names are kept there, not in letters but in weight and depth. The ground remembers. This was not revenge. Revenge is a shout and a show. This was reckoning, counted, quiet, complete as a closed door. It was not hope. Hope asks to be seen. Reckoning is a hand on wood, intimate and invisible, teaching iron to keep faith with silence. The room that once held a ceremony of scoops now holds a different liturgy. Hinges that pray by not moving, boards that testify by refusing, a latch that says amen by settling true. Leaves skitter across the threshold in a dry season, making a sound like pages turned by someone careful. In wet weather, a soil-dark line forms under the sill and stays until the sun asks it to leave. A candle stub found on a shelf refuses to crumble, a little spine of wax that keeps its shape longer than it should. If someone were to stand there at dusk and wait, they might hear a number spoken once, then a breath, then another number, then the wind. Walk with us into future investigations, one hinge, one ledger, one whisper at a time. If the silence stayed with you, please like, so we know you felt it. Share this with someone who keeps quiet truths so the ground remembers farther. Subscribe for careful archival episodes as they appear, and tap the bell to be notified. And in the comments answer with just one word: counted or remembered.